Good afternoon, Moscow. Very happy to be with you today at the conference. Thank you for the invitation to speak, Diana. Hello, Diana. Nice to be working together again. Okay, today we're going to be talking about preparation for impending death. Next 35 minutes on the subject of preparation for impending death, I will be addressing the following issues. I'm going to share a screen with you now. So we're going to be, as professionals in the health and psychosocial fields, one of our big challenges is how to communicate with our patients and their frightened families. So in the subject of preparation for impending death, we're going to be talking for the next 35 minutes about the following issues. First of all, helping the patient and family say goodbye, whether or not the patient is conscious. Secondly, special considerations involving corona or COVID. And thirdly, how to help the staff take a few minutes after the death of a patient before moving on to the next patient. One of the main difficulties of terminal patients or patients that are dying actively is isolation. And this can be avoided by communication. However, not in the loosest sense of communication. We're not talking about talking at the patient. We're primarily speaking about listening to the patient. So how is this listening to accomplished? Let's start with the barriers to listening to the patient. The staff fears, fear of death, fear of what questions can be asked. Their staff fears countertransference, time restrictions, and the initial resistance many times on the part of the family. So let's go through these things one by one. The time issue, let's talk about first. I know it's the third item, but let's talk about that one first. There's always time constraints in the hospital. There are the constraints of understaffing, of overwork, of COVID, which has taken some of the staff out of the department into other departments. And the good news is that good communication doesn't take a lot of time. It can be done in a very few minutes, in small 10-minute bites, let's say. It also happens that most of the fears of patients pop up at night, which means that there's less work during the evening and there's more possibility of listening to the patient, spending time with them. So in real time, what does this look like? This kind of communication that I'm speaking about. You walk into the room of the patient, you pull up a chair and sit down. We will discuss things like that about body language momentarily. You pull up a chair and you sit down and look them in the eyes. We'll discuss that also. And say, I have only a few minutes. Okay. When the time of the few minutes is elapsed, when you have to leave, stand up, say, I'll come again when I have some time, and return the chair to its place. Okay, a few minutes. In any case, you would be spending a few minutes with this patient. And the difference between busying yourself with all kinds of activities around the room, or with straightening tubes, or with, checking pulse and all those kinds of things, and making eye contact with the patient, sitting down and making eye contact is only a question of good communication. It's not a question of time. Let's move on to the barrier of fear. What are we afraid of? What if the patient asks me if he's dying? First of all, only physicians are supposed to answer this question. So what can be the answer of a physician? I'm very sorry. Yes. But we'll be with you throughout this time. Pause and be silent. And then after that, you say, you will not be alone. It's a good time to say goodbye to your family, or perhaps something else that you want to say to them. You pause. You wait for the patient reaction. You respond to the patient reaction. It might be crying. It might be yelling, it might be anything. You let the patient respond. And then you say, what is the hardest thing for you? Okay, why would you ask a question like this? Because this is how you give the stage to the patient. Okay, let's talk about the stage. Those of you who have heard me speak before know I talk a lot about the stage. So how do you give the stage to the patient? The stage is the thing that's missing for most patients. The stage in communication is always for one person. That means if you're talking, you're not listening. And if you're listening, you're not talking, right? So what we want to do is you ask this question and then you are silent and you wait for them to answer. Now, when they respond with when they say what the hardest thing is, you respond with either or whatever, or if you have a more practical response, you give a more practical response. What does that mean? For example, if the patient says, I'm afraid of pain, you say, are you in pain right now? No, I'm not really in pain right now. Well, we know how to handle the pain. So we will take care of your pain because it's coming. What else about this is hard for you? And then they will go on to the next subject. Now, if you're not a physician and you are asked this question, am I dying? You look at them and give them the question back in as close to the same words that they're using as you can. Someone says, am I dying? I would say to them, are you dying? Okay. Usually they say, I think I am. And then I say, what is the hardest part for you about dying? That is to say, we're on the same track as we were with the questions with the physician without answering the question directly. We're not allowed to answer it directly. Okay. But we're providing an opportunity for the patient to talk about their fears, which makes the fears less onerous to them, less heavy. Okay. So the first time you do this, it'll be very frightening. But once you start doing it, like any tool or skill, it becomes easier. Like when you start driving, the first time you're driving, you're paying attention to every single thing around you. And then after a while, it becomes part of you and you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily really nervous about it, okay? It's very, very effective. So let's go back to the barrier slide. Then we're talking about countertransference. What's countertransference? This means perhaps the patient is similar to your parent or your child or your brother or your sister or a very good friend or someone else, and so it makes you very frightened to see this patient dying. Here, the main tool is to repeat to yourself repeatedly, this patient isn't me, this brother isn't me, this sister isn't me, it's not my sister, it's not my parent, it's not my... Now, it's not a very good tool, but it's a little bit of a tool, and it can help you somewhat. If the countertransference is crippling you for taking care of the patient, it's so bad that you can't even look at this patient, then ask other people on the staff to help you with this, for assistance to take care of the patient. And then after the death has happened, go and get counseling by the social worker or a psychologist to help you deal with your unresolved issues about death, because that's what this is talking about. Okay, let's move over to the body language. Now, you will have paid attention that in the first part of this talk, I was giving directions like sit down and make eye contact and so on. I want to talk about body language. Why is this significant? First of all, eye level is about control of the situation. If my eye level is above yours, I'm taking control. If it's below yours, I'm giving control to you. If it's equal, I'm sharing control. And that is what you want to do. You don't want to take control of someone who doesn't have any control anyway. The person's dying. They're in a hospital. They're in clothing that is not their clothing. They're in a place that's not their place. Their food is not their food. The smells are not theirs. They're already out of control. Their body has betrayed them. You don't need to increase the helplessness by standing over them and looking down. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is look at them equally so that they can feel like they can speak to you. Okay, that is very, very important. Now, the second part of this is eye contact. It's hard to make eye contact with someone who's suffering. It really is. But the eye contact is extremely important because my looking at you tells you that you exist for me. Your looking at me tells me that I exist for you. So if I don't look at you, and if you don't look at the person, it's as if they don't exist for you. And that means they have to go through a psychological, social death before the physical death. And this is completely unnecessary. So why are we afraid to make eye contact? Because we're afraid of those same questions that we were talking about before, which is, am I dying? Or what should I do? Or any of those questions, about the impending death, or I'm terribly afraid. How will we handle this? You help the person find their own answer to the fear. You suggest it if it's possible for us to give an answer, like for instance, are you in pain? You're not in pain. We'll make sure the pain is taken care of. That's an answer that we can give. But if they say something like, is there life after death? It's a very, very, very rare question for people who are dying, which is an interesting thing because mostly people who are healthy ask these kinds of questions and not the dying people. But then you can offer other suggestions. Would you like me to bring a priest? Would you like me to bring a religious leader to talk to you? What would help you here? And you could try to start approaching the issue. The next one is leaning slightly towards the patient. Now, if I'm here, I feel much more removed from you than if I'm here. And if I'm here, I'm with you and not with my fears. So it's better for me and it's better for them. Now, if the patient is conscious, give them the stage. That's very clear. You can give them the stage and you can say, you can ask questions and they can give answers, or they can cry, or they can scream, or they can do anything they want with the stage. They're allowed to choose. But what happens if they're unconscious? What do you do then? Well, if the patient isn't conscious, you speak to them in order to model to the family that they can also speak to them. Now, why would you do something like that if the patient is unconscious? Well, we know that many times unconscious people can hear. We know this from various studies. And so we have to act as if the patient can hear all the time. Now, this means actually two things. This means one of the things is that we can speak to the patient and say things that we want to say to him. The other thing is that the patient can hear, and so we shouldn't speak about things we don't want them to hear in their presence, And we shouldn't just chatter on. We should directly speak to them. Let me give you an example. I went to the room of a woman who was actively dying. That is to say, she died a few hours after I left the room. And she was actively dying in a hospital type setting. Very nice hospital setting. Her two sons, adult sons, were in the room with her, sitting in chairs far away from her, back of their backs to the wall. And she was lying in bed, and I knew I had counseled with her for many months before that, while she was ill and while she began to die and all that. So I had spoken to her when she was conscious Many times we had many conversations. So I went in the room and I said to her, "Hello, Louise. How are you? I see that you're laying in bed and your sons are here in the room with you. They're sitting next to the bed also. I know how important aesthetics were to you all the time while you were conscious, and I would like to tell you that you look lovely. You're very clean. The room here is very nice looking. The air is fresh, and you don't appear to be in any pain, and I'm very happy to hear that. So I'm going to say goodbye now. Now with your sons. This is a very intimate time to be together. Thank you for all the talks that we had. I learned a lot from you, and may you be blessed on your journey." That I left. And her sons afterward told me that they began to speak to her. They had not spoken to her before. Anyway, when we're dealing with unconscious people, patients, you should always speak to them. Imagine to yourself for a moment that you're laying, sleeping, and suddenly someone grabs you. It's a frightening feeling. You don't want to do that. We'd rather say, "Mrs. Levin, I'm coming into your room now, and I'm turning you over because I want to help you with the bed sores. I'm going to be massaging some cream into the bed sores." You know, you say the things that you're doing so the patient knows what's going on. Okay? So, because otherwise it can feel like an attack. And okay. Silence is also appropriate sometimes, but speaking with a patient, especially an unconscious patient, is very important for the modeling. But you don't have to fill the air with chatter. Not, "Oh, did you hear what happened today?" No, unnecessary. The time in a room with a dying patient is almost a holy time. I hesitate to use that word because I don't know how any of you interpret that word, but it's a very special time. It's a very intimate time. And it's, in my opinion, it's a privilege to be in this place. And so we must treat it as a privilege, I think. So if the family is in the room during the final moments and you see family members pasted to the back wall so that they won't next to the dying patient, and they look distressed, when you see that a patient is dying quietly and smoothly, then you go to the person and you put your arm around their shoulders and you move them towards the bed. And what you want to do here is you want to show them that the patient isn't suffering, they are suffering. The patient isn't the one who's suffering. Okay. Why do you want to show someone? Because if you don't do this, if you don't bring them closer and show them that the patient isn't suffering, they will remember this as a death with a lot of suffering and pain, even when it was not, which is a pity. They will also probably say things about the hospital that are not very complimentary, that you weren't able to handle the pain as you should have because their person suffered and died. And if it's not true, it's a real pity for people to believe that this is what happened. So what you do is you put your arm around the shoulder, move the person closer to the bed, and you point out that the person isn't suffering. Now, how can you point out that the person isn't suffering? Well, on the outside, we can see that the muscles or the hands are clenched when we suffer, and they're relaxed when we are not suffering. So you point that out. You point out that the jaw is locked, usually when we suffer, and it's relaxed when we're not suffering. Between the eyebrows, you can see when people are suffering, and it's relaxed when they're not suffering. These are the things that you point out as proofs to the person that as far as we can tell, this person is not suffering. They're unconscious. And these things are very important for their grief afterwards, for the rest of the family, and for the hospital. If no imagined suffering is is talked about when there was actually no real suffering identified. So how do we help the patient and the family say goodbye? Now, there is a type of model for this that was by Ira Byock, who is a palliative doctor also in Montana, I believe, in the United States. And he has, from his book that is called Dying Well, he has this model that he's called the 5 things. And it has 5 things that you can say that will help you with your grief afterwards. Now, I would like to point out that these 5 things are also, when I'm working with patients, I also tell them these same 5 things to say to their family members, and the family members to say these things to them, so that they will all be able to be released from baggage, basically, that we pick up during the course of our lives together and our relationships. Now, these 5 things are, they're just titles, but they have to be very specific. You know, you can go to the patient and say, please forgive me for, and you say what things you're talking about, because forgiveness is not cheap. Forgiveness is expensive. So when you're talking about forgiveness, you have to ask specifically for the item. You can't just say, forgive me for anything I did that hurt you all your life. That doesn't work. You can say the issues. They can be old issues. They can be new issues. They can be, forgive me that I didn't send you to the doctor earlier. They can be, forgive me that I took your bike without permission when we were 7 years old. They can be anything that pops up. What you do is you think about the things that you think that you did that injured the person that you're talking to. And those are the items that you ask forgiveness for. Now, generally speaking, list that I think of the things that I have hurt someone and the list that that they think that I've hurt them are not the same lists. Okay, but I'm responsible for my list. So I bring that up. If the patient is conscious, they may say, I don't even remember that, but you didn't ask forgiveness for this other thing, and it might come up anyway. But it's a good way to get these things aired out and to finish with them before the person dies. The second thing is, I forgive you. Now, I forgive you for all kinds of things. It could be also whatever caused injury. We're not talking about intent. It doesn't matter what the intent was. If there was intent to hurt or not intent to hurt, it's not relevant. What's relevant is injury only. So if you say, I forgive you, you know what things hurt you that this person did. Now, sometimes when I bring this up, people say, this person never did anything bad, or I never did anything bad to this person. Mostly parents of dying children will say this child never did anything bad. It's not true. You know, it's not true. Every time we interact with someone, you know, especially someone that we're very close to, there's a chance that we're hurting them. So we have to pay attention to this, you know, in terms of how they feel. You know, you can say, I forgive you for being sick. You know, that sounds like a terrible thing because the person didn't do it intentionally. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say we're not talking about intent. We're talking about injury. The sickness is injuring you also. I remember one time I was giving a talk about these things to a group of nurses, and one of the nurses started crying. And I said, what's going on? She said her 16-year-old son had died a few months earlier. And she said, he kept saying to me, I'm so sorry that you have to spend all your time in the hospital. I'm so sorry that I'm sick. I'm so sorry that I'm dying. I'm so sorry that I'm going to leave you. And she kept saying, there's nothing to forgive. There's nothing to forgive. Instead of just saying, I forgive you, which is another possibility. So I think that this is very releasing, you know. The third item, these two things, the forgiveness, is related to intellect. You decide to forgive. You don't have to feel like you want to forgive. You can decide to forgive. So, and you can actually decide to forgive any really bad things too, and things that are not so bad. You know, I forgive you for your drug abuse. I forgive you for your unfaithfulness. I don't feel like I want to forgive, but I want to release it so I don't have to carry it. Because with forgiveness, you have only two options. You either forgive or you carry. That's it. There's no other option that I'm aware of. Okay. I'm glad there's even an option, even one option that we have to release this. So the next category, I love you, is the emotional side. Now, I love you, of course, it's not always true. So what we have to do is we have to stick to the truth. The truth is very, very important here. Otherwise, this is an ineffective idea. So if we're talking about the truth, we can't always say, I love you. You could say, I tried to love you. You could say, I wanted to love you. You could say whatever you want, but you say one of the things. If you're actually saying, I love you, then what you want to say is not just, I love you. You want to say, what do I love about you? Why do I love you? And you say the things. This is a way of giving the person back a little bit of their humanity before they die. A way of helping them understand who they were in this world and who they are in this world to you. So you can say these things to them. It's very, very helpful. It's almost, in a way, it's almost like a eulogy before the person dies, something that you can actually give them. And it's very nice. Now, sometimes they'll say the thing back also. I remember when I was having meetings with a man who was dying and his son. Now, this man was a fisherman. He would go out on the sea for days at a time, sometimes more, and fish and bring back the fish. And he was like this tough guy. He had skin like shoe leather, you know, really, really a very colorful kind of character. And I was talking to him while he was dying. And I was talking to him about this. And I said, you should say, the next thing that you should say to your son is I love you. And he said, I can't say that. I said, do you love him? And he said, I do, but I can't say that. We don't say that in my family. And I said, well, he knows it. And he said, oh, I'm sure he knows it. I said, really? I said, maybe you're sure now. Maybe he does know it. Maybe he won't know it in a year. Maybe he won't be sure in 2 years. Maybe he won't be sure in 5 years that his father ever cared for him. If you say it, he'll know it for sure. Said, but we never say that in my family. I said, you know, it might be hard, but hard means possible. If I were you, I'd try it. You don't have to, but I would try it. I went outside to the coffee area and sat with his son, and I talked to him about it. And when I talked to him about these 5 things, I talked to him, not with the father present. Talked to him, and I got to I love you, and I said, what about this? And he said, we don't say that in my family. I said, do you love him? He said, yes, very, very much. I said, so tell him, because you'll never know if you knew for sure 5 years hence, or 10 years hence, or 3 years hence, or 2 months hence. You won't know if your father really knew that you loved him if you didn't tell him. So this young man went in the room and sat with his father, reached for his hand. I was in the room, I saw this, reached for his hand, held his hand tight, and said, Dad, I love you. And they both burst out crying. And the fisherman said also, I love you too. And it's a very healing thing. And this is something you can help people do. You know, it's something you can help people do. The next thing is to say thank you. Now, the thank you has to, like the rest of the thing, it has to be honest and it has to be true. So you thank the person for what you received from them. Now, it can be something like, thank you for your eyebrows. I got your eyebrows if you're the child. Or it can be, thank you for your choosing me out of all the people you could have chosen 40 years ago, or thank you for giving me birth because you were a terrible parent and there was nothing else I can thank you for, but I can thank you for that, or whatever. You know, you find the true things. Now, obviously, because we're talking about the true things, you can only do this individually, one-on-one. Okay. The fisherman and his son, not the fisherman and his 5 sons, the fisherman and 1 son, so that the truth can come out, because the more people are in the room, the less the truth will come out. So you want this one-on-one situation. Now, there is an exception to this 5 thing. There is an exception, and you have to take it into consideration. If the patient was abusive to the person that is saying goodbye, they should not do this. They should not do this, because it's another opportunity for the abuse to continue. I will not forgive you. I hate you. Don't let that happen. Do not send an abusive, in an abusive relationship, do not allow this, do not offer this idea of the 5 things, shall I buy. Okay. Only if it's a regular relationship. I mean, of course, there are things that were done in the relationship that are not good. That's the story of how we relate to people. Always have. But I'm talking about the difference between abusive and a normal relationship. It's an abusive relationship. You do not give this. How do you know if it's abusive relationship? You talk to the person that's visiting, or you talk to the patient during the time they're there, and you say, what kind of a relationship did you have with this person? And then you can say the 5 things. It doesn't have to have been a wonderful relationship for the 5 things. It just has to be not abusive, okay? So, where do these 5 things come from? Okay, these 5 things came from the idea that when someone dies suddenly, when you read about it in the newspaper, terrible car accident or something, and you read that they interview the survivors, or they interview the family members, and these are the 5 things they say they wish they could have said. I wish I could have said this to him. I wish I could have thanked him. I wish I could have said these things. The last thing is the goodbye. Goodbye has to be according to a lot of things. The first 4 things you can do very early in the disease, or later in the disease, or when the patient is unconscious. But the 5th thing you do when the death is imminent. Now, when you see the death is imminent, you see signs, you see physical signs. You know these signs already. You know the breathing. You know the type of the Cheyne-Stock breathing. You know the discoloration of the extremities. You know when this is coming, and that's when you tell the patient, the family, that it's time now to say goodbye. Now, the goodbye has to be appropriate to the people that are saying it. What does that mean? That means it has to be within their framework of how to say goodbye. Now, someone will say, goodbye, we will meet in the next world, or we'll meet in heaven, or people that don't believe that can't say that. They have to say something that they do believe, which is, I'll never forget you. I will remember what you have given me. I will remember the lessons that I learned from you, which is part of the thank you too. It has to be appropriate. Some people will say, go towards the light, and some people will say something else, but it has to be appropriate to the person that's speaking, okay? And that's at the appropriate time. Now, let's talk for a moment about the considerations involving corona. Now, it's very difficult to say what these considerations are, because, I mean, I don't know about your government, but in our government, they change all the time. Every time there's a new idea, okay? But what we do know is we know that it has interfered with visits with people, specifically corona patients, but also other people. They won't let a lot of visitors come. Sometimes this means that the person is dying completely alone, isolated. They are surrounded by staff that are completely covered with masks and outfits and all these things, so they don't even feel like there's a human being taking care of them. This is very, very difficult in terms of the visits. Fortunately, we are in a day and age when you can have virtual visits, which is by cell phone. These can be accomplished with, by one family member coming in and using the cell phone for the patient to talk to or say goodbye or say the 5 things to other family members. It can also be accomplished by nursing staff or helping staff, the helpers of the nurses, or volunteers can come in with a cell phone and do this task with the dying patient and the family, so that there can be virtual visits or photographs that can be, everybody is carrying around a camera all the time when you're carrying around a cell phone. It's also the issues about burial. Now the issues about burial have become very complicated. We don't want a lot of people to come to the graveyard. Sometimes people can't because they would be traveling to come to accompany the burial, and they can't do it because they can't get on a plane. And so there is an option to film the whole burial in real time, so that the people from other countries or other areas or other geographical areas or people that are not mobile can also be part of this, which is a very big plus for those who aren't mobile. And they can even participate, they can even speak through a microphone at the burial if that is part of your burial customs. I'm not familiar with all of them. So these are things that we can do to overcome the limitations that now, when I was speaking also about people that are unconscious, and I said that we know that they can hear, many of them can hear. We don't know that they can understand. We know that they can hear, but the music of the voice of the person that they are familiar with is also something that is can be very good. So also in consideration with corona, the voice that they can hear on the telephone that they recognize can be helpful to them when they're isolated from the visits. So these are current problems that we have, and it's very, very unfortunate, but that is what there is. Now, of course, COVID-19 has complicated everything in our lives, not just illness and burial, but everything else also. So now I would like to go into the last item that I wanted to talk to you about, which is the pause. Now, the pause is something that originated in the States, and it is for staff members at the time of death, right immediately after the death, actually, not at the time. Now, what this does is it gives the staff a moment to absorb the fact that a death has occurred, and a moment to recover slightly from it before they move on to the next patient. It's really, really an important concept. And from what I hear, it works very well. I have not been present for it, but I have heard a lot of very good reports from people who have used this. Now, first of all, you're using the staff members that are present at the time of the death. You are not calling everyone to come in from their home for this. That's not a possibility. But the ones that are present at the time of the death, following the death, the staff members stand around the bed of the patient, and someone who is a designated person we'll say, we will now have a moment of silence to honor the life that was here and is no longer here. And then you wait 30 seconds to 1 minute of silence. And then that same person would say, the designated person, would anyone like to add something? And you wait 10 seconds, and if not, you say thank you, and everyone leaves and goes to their next task. It just provides a small space between the death of one patient and going to the next patient, which I think is extremely important for the staff. There are cases now that people are inviting the family to be part of this, which is, of course, tremendously honoring to the family. I wouldn't suggest doing it initially. I would suggest doing it initially just with staff members. And then afterwards, perhaps when you see how it goes with the staff members, invite the family if that seems appropriate to you. I think that they would appreciate it tremendously. So this little cartoon that I have, which is Charlie Brown saying, "Someday we will all die, Snoopy." And Snoopy saying, "True, but on all the other days, we will not." So, questions?